Donald Trump reverses himself on the Electoral College, says he could have won the popular vote. Donald Trump on Tuesday contended that if the U.S. election had been based on the popular vote he would have won even bigger and more easily in an emphatic response to those claiming his victory is illegitimate because more Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. Mr. Trump was uncharacteristically withdrawn in his first week as president-elect, sitting for just one television interview and going hours or even days without tweeting, but with petitions circulating to end the Electoral College after Mrs. Clinton was denied the White House despite defeating Mr. Trump by 0.7% in the overall vote total. Mr. Trump returned to Twitter yesterday on Tuesday. "If the election were based on total popular vote I would have campaigned in New York, Florida and California and won even bigger and more easily," he wrote. Mr. Trump also defended the Electoral College, a system he called a disaster for democracy on election night 4 years ago. At the time of that post the popular vote was tight but Barack Obama led comfortably in the Electoral College. "The Electoral College is actually genius in that it brings all states, including the smaller ones, into play," he wrote on Tuesday. "Campaigning is much different. One petition calling for Mrs. Clinton to be made president based on the results of the popular vote now has more than 4 million signatures." Mr. Trump won the Electoral College by a 306-232 margin, boosted by narrow wins in historically Democratic states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Mrs. Clinton never visited Wisconsin during the campaign, and only prioritized Michigan in the final days. Mr. Obama seemed to criticize Mrs. Clinton on Monday for failing to keep as active a schedule as Mr. Trump, and for taking some states for granted. Mr. Trump won the Electoral College by a 306-232 margin, boosted by narrow wins in historically Democratic states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Mrs. Clinton never visited Wisconsin during the campaign, and only prioritized Michigan in the final days. Mr. Obama seemed to criticize Mrs. Clinton on Monday for failing to keep as active a schedule as Mr. Trump, and for taking some states for granted. "We have to compete everywhere. We have to show up everywhere," he said, using Iowa, a state he won twice but which Mrs. Clinton lost, as an example. "I won Iowa not because the demographics dictated that I would win Iowa. It was because I spent 87 days going to every small town and fair and fish fry and VFW hall. There's some counties maybe I won, that people didn't expect, because people had a chance to see you and listen to you and get a sense of who you stood for and who you were fighting for," he continued. Bernie Sanders, runner-up to Mrs. Clinton in the Democratic primary elections, said he was deeply humiliated that Mr. Trump had won so soundly among white working-class voters. "I think that there needs to be a profound change in the way the Democratic Party does business," he said. Mrs. Clinton, meanwhile, recently told donors that she was poised to win before James Comey, the FBI director, intervened in the election by announcing he was reopening the investigation into her private email server. An analysis conducted by her campaign blamed the loss on circumstances outside of their control.